fingernails.
It's
like
karma.
It's karma.
We're not supposed to believe in
We're
karma.
not supposed to.
Actually, we're going to need your book for something, so.
Okay.
Okay, guys, is it actually recording?
Yeah, it is.
Alright, we're recording, so chaos should probably stop. We need all the books, so don't put the camera on.
These are for another subject.
No, we need them all. We're going to stack books high today. Okay, folks, so today we're talking about motion. Make sure the lab sheet I'm passing around right now comes back next week so I can look at it for one thing, and because we're going to do the back of it next week, so you need it. Also, make sure you bring a calculator next week. Every person will need a calculator next week, and you will need a calculator to take the test, unless you really wanted to do it by hand, which, you know, it's better to do a calculator in class so we can just be faster, so don't forget to bring one. It doesn't have to be complicated. So, bring your calculator. Or if your cell phone does that, that's fine too. So, motion. Position is the first thing you need to think of when you think about motion. Because to tell us something is moving, you have to know its position. And if its position is changing relative to something, usually you. Okay, so think, is my position changing relative to Chris? How about now? Yeah. Yes. Okay. How about, so we could say, well, Chris and I are not moving, right? But in what way would I be right?
That you are moving?
That we're not moving. Chris and I are not moving.
Relative to you.
Okay, relative to you guys, we're not moving unless you're wiggling or something. Relative to each other, we're not moving. But in what way would I be wrong? How are we moving?
Well, if you're looking at it from the world's perspective. From the moon.
The whole universe is moving.
Okay, so we are hurtling through space, so Chris and I are moving, as are all of you. The Earth is spinning, the Earth is hurtling around the sun, the whole universe is expanding, our galaxy is moving. I mean, like, the movement is, you know, there are just so many kinds of movement that to describe something's position is very complicated. So we just need to use a reference point. In reference to the Earth, I'm not moving right now, I'm standing in one place. In reference to the moon, am I moving? Yes. In reference to you guys, we're not really moving. So you must consider a reference point when you talk about your position, because position is very relative. Thank you. All right. So, position is a little more complicated than they tell you in the book also. So we'll give you kind of a quick rundown on position. So, and on speed and velocity. Well, let's talk about speed and velocity first, and then we'll talk about some of the nuances of it. So what is speed? Like, some people say I'm speeding down the road in a car. What is speed? Max?
How fast something moves.
Okay, how fast something moves. And now that we're entering into the world of motion and mechanics and physics, it's really important that you keep units at the forefront of everything that you write down. So let's say people are like, oh, he was going 65 in a 50 zone, right? People don't necessarily state the units. Well, 65 what? Is it 65 inches per hour? 65 inches per hour is not going to get you a speeding ticket.
You could technically get a ticket for going too slow.
I guess you could.
Car breaks down.
You would definitely get that kind of ticket. So 65 miles per hour. For speed, you've got to have units, like miles per hour. You could have meters per second. Any distance divided by any time unit is fine for speed. Speed doesn't require anything else, though, because speed is scalar. Does anyone know what scalar means? Chris?
Scalar means not having any directional information.
Okay, no directional information. That means you just have a magnitude, which is the number, and a unit, which tells you what the number really means, but you don't know what direction that is. Speed doesn't have a direction associated with it, and nobody's interested in direction if they're talking about speed. So what if I wanted to talk about velocity? Well, what if I said my velocity is 65 miles per hour? Well, how is velocity different from speed?
Tells the direction.
It does tell a direction. That makes it a vector quantity. So is 65 miles an hour sufficient to report your velocity?
No.
No. What do you need to know?
Where it's
The
going.
area.
So you could say west. If you need to give a direction, because you know you're dealing with a vector quantity, whether it's, well, you guys don't really talk about position as a vector quantity either. But any vector quantity, if it just doesn't really tell you a whole lot, but you know you're telling me velocity or acceleration next week, and you need to say something, you can just say in the direction it's going or something vague. Just make sure that you're telling me, or you can put a positive sign in front of it, or you can put a negative sign if it's negative. But you need to do something to indicate that the thing has a direction. If it's a vector quantity like velocity or acceleration, you've got to tell me a direction because, well, vector quantities just have to have direction. So if I said west, if I happen to know what direction it was going, that would work. Velocity gives us more information than speed about direction, for example, because really and truly time is not really a vector. The difference comes in the way that the distance is measured. In speed, you quite literally measure distance that something goes. So let's say I'm going from point A to point B, and I take this curvy path, right? So I would actually have to measure, like if I walked this path, I would have to take my little, Google app and walk the path and figure out how far I walked. Or I'd have to do a complicated math problem with curves that you guys don't know how to do yet to figure out the literal distance that you go along the path. For velocity, the reason that it's a vector quantity is even if I take that same curving path like that, I quite literally measure the straight line distance from point A to point B. Velocity is completely independent of the path that you take. It's just that distance, which of course is always going to be the shortest distance between the 2 points, regardless of if that's the path you walked or not. So you can just lay down a ruler and measure it. Even if you didn't walk along the line of that ruler, that is the path that you're measuring for velocity. So you do the measurement for the distance differently from velocity. And that's why it's a vector quantity and speed is scalar. So when you say that something has a speed of 65 miles an hour and a velocity of 65 miles an hour west, they actually might be going at a different rate, which is sort of complicated. But you can see that this one is going to go a further distance than this one, because even if they follow the same path, you only measure this straight line for velocity. And that's really kind of the heart of what the vector quantity is telling you, that direction matters to the extent that nothing else does. And direction has to be constant in a vector. So that's just kind of an aside of why it's different. Let's see. That's basically all. So we're going to look at the lab sheet first, and then we're going to do the study guide problems. Where is my lab sheet? Here we go. Okay. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate a little bit before we start making a mess again, because we seem to be really good at making messes. So why does direction matter? What kind of difference does direction make? So let's say I've got these 2 inclines. You guys are going to prop your pizza boxes up on books so you don't have to try to hold them. Max?
Mrs. Levi, so with a vector quantity, it is always the distance between the 2 points, the shortest distance?
Yes, and it makes problems get really ridiculous because quite literally, like if I start here and I walk around at 1 meter per second, my velocity. What is my speed? You worry about the actual path I take. So if I'm walking at 1 meter per second, then here, my speed is 1 meter per second, but what's my velocity?
1 meter per second in the direction you go.
No. Did I go anywhere?
This is a trick question.
It totally is a trick question.
You're not really going anywhere.
She's not going anywhere. She's
My
just going in a
velocity
circle.
is 0 because the straight line distance between where I started and where I finished is 0. I didn't go anywhere. My velocity was 0 on that trip, but my speed was 1 meter per second.
I don't remember reading this in my book.
No, I'm telling you stuff that wasn't in the book. I just want you to understand, because it seems like speed and velocity, it seems like a vector really doesn't mean anything except you just tack on a direction to the end, and that's not really the case. Speed and velocity are very different. A vector doesn't just mean you tack on a direction at the end. It really changes how you take the measurement of the quantity. So my speed can be 1 meter per second, but if I don't actually go anywhere, my velocity is 0. Terrible, isn't it? It gets really confusing later, but that's not until physics, so don't worry. You guys are okay. So think, if I have these two inclines, let's say they're at the same angle, and I'll leave one down so that I can hold on to two balls, right? So what is the, well maybe I'll do it this way so you can see. What is the relative speed of the two balls compared in reference to each other? Hopefully about the same. Okay, so in reference to each other, they're really not moving, hopefully, unless they wiggle off their path or I let them go at a different moment. Okay, so when you have the speeds pointed in the same direction, that's how you can see that vectors make a big difference, right? So velocity pointed in the same direction, and relative to each other, it's like they're not even moving. So what if, I don't know if I can get them to work this way. What if one of them's moving and one of them's not? What is their speed in reference to each other going to be?
The red one and the blue one is 0 because it's not moving, and the other one is going faster because it is moving relative to the other.
Okay, so this one's moving relative to that one. So when they collide, something happens, right? Do you think more force will happen in the collision this way or the other way? Why?
This way. Because both of their speeds combined will create a bit greater force than just one colliding with the other alone.
Okay, so my ball's going to get away now. I probably don't need it anymore. Thank you. You can throw it. So you guys are going to actually do that with eggs because Dr. Wild promises me that messes make kids happy and make them pay attention.
Real eggs.
I didn't let them do it last year.
Real eggs.
Real eggs. Physics had to drop them off the roof
No,
today,
it's
so I
only a
decided to
live
let you break them too.
Drop them off the roof. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to do physics.
No eggs survived so far today.
So what if?
You're not going to get a live egg.
No.
What?
Eggs
No
are
one would
not
ask that
fertilized,
question.
so there's no baby. They're not babies. They're safe.
I'll bring fertilizer.
I don't want any fertilized eggs. We don't kill babies in here. So look at number 1 on your lab sheet and make sure you keep good notes so that your lab sheet is, finished. So we're going to roll eggs 2 at a time down an incline, and we're going to predict which eggs will break. So if I do like I did with the balls, and I have 2 eggs rolling in the same direction side by side, that's number 1A. Or do you predict that the eggs will break if they roll down together like that? No. Probably not. Why not?
Well, they're moving relative to each other, but they're not really moving.
They're really not moving relative to each other, which is sort of hard. They're moving relative to us, and, us is the reference point we like best. But relative to each other, they're actually just not moving. It's like if you're sitting in a car next to your mom or friend, and you two are hurtling down the road, you're not moving relative to each other. You're just sitting next to each other still. But compared to everything else, relative to everything else, you are moving. So when the eggs go like this, do you predict that they'll break? No, let's hope not.
That's a
We'll have to
guess.
combine lab groups if they do. So one egg rolling down the incline, crashing into the stationary egg. Would you predict the egg will break or not break?
What kind of eggs I think the rolling egg, the one egg that's going down the incline will break.
Okay.
I think he means are they hard boiled?
They are not hard boiled.
It will
sadly.
break. Yeah, it will break.
So
It depends on, some chicken eggs are a lot.
they're grocery store eggs, not farm fresh. So farm fresh eggs are much less likely to break. Their calcium is, their shell is stronger. The older an egg gets, the easier